one day my father came home. I think I must have been in school. My younger sister was still in nursery, and he found a note from my mother saying I'd gone to buy some jam,
Mm-hmm.
and then she didn't come home that day, and she didn't come home the next day, and she seemingly vanished, disappeared. So yeah, as a 6-year-old, then imagine.
Zsike Peter, welcome to the Purpose-Led Leadership Podcast. Absolutely delighted to have you on my show. We recently connected on LinkedIn, and I was fascinated by your profile. So for those that don't know, what do you do now?
Ooh, what do I do now? It's always a good question, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do I do? So I have a boutique agency, content marketing agency, focusing predominantly on LinkedIn organic content for now. The agency is called Vampire Digital, and we are a team of 9 as of last week.
Mm-hmm.
And we help select clients. I'd like to say VIP clients. They're rather special.
Yeah.
To be heard and seen on LinkedIn and be known in their category.
So the whole vampire thing, what is that about?
Vampires. So I was born in Transylvania and spent half of my childhood in Transylvania, where the vampires come from. Although when people ask me, are there any vampires in Transylvania? I always say, well, no, because I lived there for over 500 years and I've never met any.
So that's in Hungary, right?
So Transylvania is Romania, although it used to be.
Right.
So it used to be Hungary historically, but
yeah.
Hungary was on the wrong side of the war, and Transylvania was acquired by Romania.
Wow.
So there's a large displaced Hungarian community actually who suddenly found themselves in Romania.
Yeah.
But they weren't just going to up and leave their hometowns.
No, that's right. I was going to ask you about that. Romania, Hungary, they're quite, forgive me if I'm wrong, quite kind of communist type, harsh dictator type countries.
Yeah.
I'd love to know your upbringing, actually. Talk to us about your journey kind of almost from school before then to now, if that's okay.
Sure. I mean, yeah. So I was born in under the Ceaușescu regime, which was like the classic dictatorship. I don't know how many people are aware of how life is, but yeah, you're not allowed to leave the country unless you're a government official. We weren't even allowed to speak our own language. So Hungarian wasn't a language that you were allowed to publicly speak. And that went the same for school. I remember when I started school as a 6-year-old. Mm-hmm. So at home, our parents, my mother's Romanian, father's Hungarian, but Hungarian born in Transylvania.
Yeah.
And at home, we would speak both languages, but in school, we weren't allowed. And I remember I was whispering to one of my friends in the break, in the toilets, and there happened to be a teacher, which I didn't notice, and I was slapped as a 6-year-old by a grown-up to say, and I will never forget her words, "This is big Romania. You will never speak any other language other than Romanian."
Wow.
And
that was considered a normal kind of thing, almost by the sound of it.
For a 6-year-old, yeah.
Wow.
So that was one of the first kind of, and it's like every book would start with Ceaușescu's portrait. Every classroom had a huge portrait of his face, and every Monday morning there was a TV screen in the room, and we had to watch his speech. The brainwashing.
So what other stuff was going on then? Because obviously very conformist, kind of like, what other forms of control were there? So,
for example, the Hungarian part of the history, they weren't allowed to teach us what really went down with Transylvania. Right. So, and the government made sure that they would spot check occasionally, so that somebody would turn up who was a government official in the middle of a history class or a literature class, making sure that the teachers were only teaching us in Romanian or about the right history of how they saw it.
Yeah. So you couldn't speak Hungarian. How did all that stuff? How did that? Obviously, you're young at this stage. How did that affect you then, and how has it affected you now? All this stuff.
I guess you don't know. If you don't know anything different, that's your reality. And because we had no access to I mean, as a child, I wasn't aware that people could tune into, if you try to listen to BBC or something like that. So obviously something was brewing, because in 1989 a revolution happened in Romania, and and funnily that was instigated by Ceaușescu's own right-hand people, so to say, who worked with him really closely. But even they got fed up with the system.
Yeah.
So you could earn plenty of money, but you had nothing to spend it on, because there was no import wasn't allowed.
Right.
I remember my mum had to queue up at 4 a.m. to get a loaf of bread. So things like that. We weren't hungry as such, but it was always just about enough. And that was the whole idea of you put everything in the collective. You're not allowed to, if you raise animals, my grandparents did, you weren't allowed to just keep those keep them to feed your family. You had to put things in the collective. So I remember my grandparents hiding a pig in the cellar. And the neighbours weren't allowed to know, because the neighbours could grass you up.
Wow. What would be the punishment for that? Any idea?
I don't know what would have been at the time. And you weren't allowed to just go out and hunt, for example, for food as well.
So no hopes, no dreams. You couldn't really there's no purpose. You couldn't really do anything in that regime, right?
That's right. So that's, my parents met under that regime, and then my mother's always had a bit of the rebelliousness about her. So this is early 1989, when from one day my father came home. I think I must have been in school. My younger sister was still in nursery, and he found a note from my mother saying I'd gone to buy some jam, and then she didn't come home that day, and she didn't come home the next day, and she seemingly vanished, disappeared. So yeah, as a 6-year-old, then imagine.
So what happened? Did she come back, or?
So we didn't know what happened, where she was. I had to change schools, and we had to move in with my grandparents, because my father was working. He couldn't just stay at home, look after us.
Yeah, right.
So life went on for us. We didn't know. We thought that.
Wow.
She was
gone,
dead.
For a 6-year-old, though, that's devastating.
Oh yeah, I had crying myself to sleep, thinking, what happened to my mother?
Yeah. Was she arrested? Was she dead? Has she been? Whatever.
Yeah, she vanished without any, and her stuff was there, her clothes, everything, nothing was missing, just her. And then in December, this is the same year, 1989, the revolution happened. Ceaușescu and his family were executed. Yeah. And suddenly then people from outside Hungary could communicate with their families.
Okay.
And a telegram arrived from the post office.
Yeah.
And it was from my mother saying that I'm alive, I'm well.
Wow.
I'm in Miskolc, which is a town in Hungary.
Yeah.
So she was granted political asylum.
Okay.
But she couldn't
message.
She couldn't. We had no phones, and even if you did, you couldn't just communicate with someone outside of Romania.
Yeah.
And so what happened? Her and a couple of her friends, 3 of her friends similar age, and her younger brother. So my mother was 23 at the time.
Yeah.
Mother of 3 children already.
Wow. Young, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And she left in the hope of finding better life for her family, to eventually move her family over.
Oh, so it was her intentional.
That was her intention, but there were no guarantees, because if the militia caught you trying to escape, worst case scenario, you would be shot. Best case scenario, you would be caught, beaten up badly, and thrown in jail. And that's the risk.
So it's a deliberate act for her to find a better life for you, but she took all the risk.
Yes, without telling our father.
Wow.
Knowing that our father wouldn't have gone along with it, for sure.
She must have been desperate then to change the life of you and your family.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the intention, but of course we didn't know that for 6 months.
6 months. So when that regime ended, then you were obviously back with your mum and stuff then, or?
So my mother and father, then they decided to keep traveling to Hungary for seasonal work, to kind of build something there together, because they didn't have anywhere to live really, and to take 3 young children there. So first they wanted to establish themselves financially. But that to and froing and traveling back and forth, my father eventually changed his mind. And we didn't see much of Mum at the time either, because she was sort of had the main job in Hungary. She already had, grown some roots there, so to say.
Yeah.
She's established herself. But, she was living in rented accommodation with many other Romanian workers at the time, seasonal workers, and you couldn't just bring a family there. My father changed his mind. My mother was still wanted to move, and that ultimately led to their marriage breaking down. So this went on for at least 3 years, and then they started going through divorce.
Yeah.
Which meant that my mum had nowhere to come back to see us, and that was quite volatile between them. That didn't go very well, and my mum in the start, she wanted to try and move us, but the law at the time was such as that we were to stay with our father as to not upset our schooling and our life.
Yeah.
But then over time, as I got older, and my sister, because 2 of us were over 10, we were asked in court if we wanted to stay with our father or mother, but my sisters were too scared.
Right.
We had a stepmother by that time, and she was not a nice stepmother, so to say.
Too scared of what?
Getting beaten, basically.
By your father?
No, by our stepmother.
Oh. Why?
So she was.
That
she's
regularly?
violent. Yeah, she was an alcoholic. Our father used to work long hours, and she had a daughter from a previous relationship, and must have been 3 or 4. And Mum used to send us sweets and things from Hungary that we couldn't get in. And I remember she would sign for the package, and then her and her daughter would eat things in front of us with that. And then our father didn't know anything about it. We were kind of threatened.
So your father remarried with her, and your mother was still trying to obviously escape you out of that situation.
Yes, so she was appealing against the court's decision, but these things take a long time. And in the meantime, we had this woman who was clearly, she was an alcoholic. She was drinking a lot. She was at home. She would, if we were, children squabble, siblings squabble, if she caught us doing anything like that, she would punish us by making us kneel on chopped up wood.
No. And what was your father doing at this point?
He didn't know. Yeah.
He didn't know. I'm so sorry to hear that. That must have affected you quite badly.
Yeah, I mean, you know that it's not right. And I was about 11 when I knew that my mother was coming back for a court case. So I took it up on myself to write a letter to the Romanian courts in Romanian. I was fairly bilingual at the time because we had to speak Romanian and learn to read and write in Romania. And I made my sisters sign. Because they were always too scared to speak up when we were asked last time in court. I thought, okay, we all actually want to go and live with our mother.
Yes.
So sign this letter, and I can't remember exactly how, but I managed to post it, and they did receive it. So when my mother came back from Hungary for that appeal case, and we all had to go in there, the judge asked if that was me who sent that letter, and I confirmed, and then that literally that sealed the deal. Basically, they didn't openly make a decision at the time. And my mother had an hour visitation with us at one of her friend's house. So my dad dropped us off there. And as soon as Dad was gone, Mum was packing her bags. She had my younger sister she remarried by this point. My younger sister was only 2 months old, in her arms.
Okay.
4 daughters. She put all of us on a train, and she basically kidnapped us because at that point the decision wasn't yet made by the courts. So I have this memory of the train pulling away from the station, and obviously by that point my father realized what was happening, and my father running after the train crying, and we all crying. It was all very emotional. I was almost 12 by then, so I remember it really well. And
so your father at that point realized what had gone on with his new wife? Yes,
because I've put all of that in the letter, but I was just too scared to mention that, because if I mentioned that in that family home, I would have had to suffer the consequences as soon as my father was out working.
On chopped wood, that sounds horrendous.
Not pleasant.
What other stuff was going on there?
Kneeling on chopped wood and dry corn. It's quite painful on the knees. That kind of thing.
I mean, bravo to your mum. So the kind of pseudo kidnapping, whatever you want to call it, that must have been scary. What happened?
Yeah, but it was a relief. So at the time, Mum was working for a Hungarian family, sort of domestic work, and they encouraged her to. They said, your children can come here whenever. And so for about 6 months, then we lived in just one bedroom, all of us, or 5 of us, in one big bed.
No way.
But she was. They were trying to sort a place together with her partner at the time, who then she married. We then all moved in with my lovely stepfather, who went from not having any children to then meeting my father and suddenly having 4 daughters.
What was he like, your stepfather?
Wonderful. So he was the local chief police officer.
Wow.
An amazing man, treated us as if we were his own daughters. He was an amazing man.
And what about your real dad? What was he doing at this point?
I mean, he didn't really have a choice. He knew no one in Hungary where we moved. He couldn't come and visit us. Right. My mother eventually did organize for us they would drop us off. It was a long journey in the car, like 14 hours in the car to go back to Romania. So, but it was like 5 years later, I think I saw my father again.
Your father must have been devastated.
He was, yes.
Absolutely.
But now, talking about it now, he tells us that he knows it was for the best, really. He didn't realize what was going on.
Is he still with her?
No. They broke up very soon after all that came out. Mm-hmm.
So
he's settled now. He's happy.
So was it kind of like a sort of a dash across the border or whatever it was, or kind of like, were you sort of looking over your shoulder for a period of time, or, Not
really. And so at the time in Romania, the children didn't get their own passports. You were in your parents' passport, so which worked out really well because Mum had her passport. She already had us on her passport, like our photos and our details were in her passport. Yeah. So, and nobody questioned her, but legally she shouldn't have taken us at the time when she did. But it all worked out well. Luckily.
It's very brave of you and courageous of you to say that. We're kind of only 10, 15 minutes into the podcast and I'm already captivated by that. I get the sense there's a lot more to it. And I obviously, as any good podcast host would, I've done my research on you. And I know you've posted about various different traumas, haven't you? And I mean, childhood trauma, it kind of stays with you, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Oh, there's a lot more that happened, like just living with, because we had to move back with our grandparents when Mum disappeared. And as it turns out, I didn't know this until years and years much later. I don't even know which part to start here. So I guess I start where I had my daughter 7 years ago, which is incredible. She's 7. And about a couple of weeks after her birth, I started having some flashbacks, some memories from my childhood, from when I was about, I would say started from about 4, so when we would be left with our grandparents now and again. Yeah. This was before Mum disappeared. And then after, more vivid memories from after. But definitely the first, I would say, around 4.
Right.
And sadly, this goes on in too many families. So child abuse, sexual child abuse.
Wow.
And nobody knew the way my grandfather was. But yeah, I never had to deal with those memories as a child for whatever reason. And well, we know why this happens, but your brain blocks away trauma like that to protect you. But then my daughter's birth has triggered those memories and flashbacks.
I'm so sorry to hear this. It's making me emotional. So you were sexually abused by your grandfather?
Yeah. Yeah.
All I can say is I'm sorry, and it signifies quite a lot, the fact that it took the birth of your child to get the flashbacks. So you've been holding that in for decades.
Yeah, unaware, really, because I remember visiting my grandparents way long after I moved to, after I moved to the UK. As an adult, I visited my grandparents, and I had no recollection when he was still alive.
Right.
He was just my grandfather.
I guess at that age, though, you wouldn't necessarily know what it is, would you?
No. Thinking back, I think if it felt something that I should, I never forget how he would say that this is our secret.
Right. Right.
So I knew I had to keep it secret.
Wow. So what age did you realise that it was what it was then?
I try not to think about it that much, to be honest.
Okay. No, that's
to analyse it from that perspective. I think I instinctively knew that it wasn't right, but it was something that I can't talk about.
Wow. I mean, I'm honoured that you've had the courage to share this. I mean, from a point of it happens more than people think. I think what you've just done here is you are going to help other people who's gone through that. So for that, I commend you.
I do feel a responsibility. I feel that I should speak up for all those children who are going through this right now, sadly.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a voice. And, people should read up about signs to watch out for. In about 99% of the cases, is always a close family member, a grandfather, a father, an uncle, and there are female perpetrators as well.
Sure.
Or a trusted close family member.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's undescribable what it must have been like. So, how did that transpire? Can I ask? Other people in your family must be aware of this now, or?
I haven't told my own father, just because my grandfather's memory for him. I don't know if I want to tarnish that for my father, and what can he realistically do. And I feel like he would feel responsible. He won't know that he doesn't speak English, so if he comes across this, he won't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
My mother, I have told my mother.
Yes.
Only recently.
Oh wow.
And she was very angry, and what I was suspecting, she does feel partially responsible, because we ended up spending a lot of time at my grandparents' house because of her moving to Hungary and not taking us initially because she wasn't able to.
And how has your mum not comforted you, but helped you through that?
We don't. So I guess those 6 years, and mum, leaving, not leaving us on purpose as such, but it felt like it at the time.
Yeah.
So we don't really have that close of a relationship. We made up a lot. We made up over time because life is too short.
Yeah.
But we never had the best of relationships. In fact, I moved out when I was 18. We didn't speak for a couple of years at the time. But she does feel, she said she feels that she could have prevented that if she knew. But how would she have known? I mean, you can't predict these things.
I mean, I talked about my own sort of trauma, abuse and stuff, abandonment, and I always seem to meet people that have had similar stuff go on, and you can't really compare these things, can you? But what you've been through is absolutely horrific. But I often find that the people that have been through childhood trauma tend to be the ones that have a lot of strength, and tend to be the ones that make something great out of that trauma. What's your take on that? And to be in the position you're in now, what I'm trying to say there is I feel as if you've harnessed this somehow and made something special out of it.
It does feel like, I don't want to sound too cliche about this, but trauma hardens you in ways that if you have the perfect upbringing, you may not face your struggles in the same way as an adult. Almost like, well, what seems like a major blow or a major issue as an adult is nothing compared to what you've been through as a child.
Yeah.
So you take things in your stride differently.
Yeah.
And for some people it breaks them, But I don't think there is a middle ground. It either breaks you or you become somebody who really pushes through obstacles, like a person who wouldn't have come through those struggles. They wouldn't be able to cope in the same way. Is it a good or a bad thing? I don't know. But it certainly shapes you in a different way, and also I feel it motivates you to do something different for the next generation, for your children. As you know,
I think that's right. I think as well, and from my experience, I think you'll concur with this. I think almost in a paradoxical way, it's taught us how not to parent and how not to be. And sometimes, as awful as it is, can be not a good way to learn, but a way to learn that can really help you in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think it forms your emotional intelligence and I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but I feel like it does affect your emotional intelligence on a deeper level when you come from a traumatic background.
Why though? Do you feel as it, for me, it almost forced me to feel almost? I don't know.
Yeah. You analyze everything from that perspective, I think. And even I feel like I analyze people. I always think, okay, what kind of trauma did they have for them to be the way they are?
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, there is something there. Why are they acting in a certain way, talking in a certain way?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's not an excuse to act like that, though, is it?
No. And if you don't deal with it, it can really overpower your whole being. And it could be, you could really easily blame your outbursts or whatever, if your character traits on your trauma and not do anything about it. So I guess that's the balance, isn't it? Is how much are you prepared to kind of talk about? Is there, should you see someone about it and then
it's a difficult one, isn't it?
And let it affect your whole being, or just let it affect your whole being in a positive term. You can't be selective, I don't think. I think you're always going to be affected.
No, but I think it takes a certain type of person to be able to deal with it how you've dealt with it. And no one would blame you if you turned out to be like really resentful, angry, bitter, twisted, all these, and a replica of some of the behaviors you've been a victim of yourself. Why do you think you managed to? I'm sure you had lots of difficulty along the way. I'm sure it's affected your mental health. I'm sure it's affected your well-being. You strike me as someone who's very measured, not very judgmental, not very resentful, quite positive outlook, quite happy. But there's no reason for you to be like that because of what's happened to you. So what is it about you that's...
I mean, it took some work. And I think that comes with age as well, to really reflect and analyze. Because I went through, 2 long-term relationships where I can see some patterns where it is to do with my upbringing. It is to do the fact that I will put up with things even though I know that's not right and that's not normal. And it takes me a long time to put my foot down and speak up. Yeah, that's always been. So I was always scared to speak up.
That really resonates.
Scenarios.
I think that really resonates with me in terms of I was abandoned by my mum. I was abused by my stepmom. I've had parental alienation. I attracted partners, women that would walk all over me, manipulate me, because I thought that was all I was worth. And it's only been the last 4 years where I've conquered that, and I wouldn't allow any of that to happen to me. But at the time, I didn't think I was worthy of anything else. I almost accepted the fact that I would be abused in a way. So
So you think you're over it and you make a success of yourself alongside life, but everybody else doesn't see how you then, how it's still affecting your relationships with other people. And it does.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you can realistically, unless you work through all of this with someone professional. And even then, it's down to you to make those changes in your future relationships. Yeah. So that measuredness and that, I have my stuff together, doesn't mean that everything else is perfect. I think that's what people forget. That we still have our demons. Yeah. And there will be still questions like, well, why me? But if I dwell over that, what's the point? What's the point dwelling over why that happened to me? Yes. Why allow that to define me? I can't change it. But I can change how I am from this moment on. Yeah. And how I react to those memories. Yeah.
And who could blame you whether you choose not to get counselling or whatever the phrase is for that, or you choose to do that? I think that's absolutely your choice. But it's easy to say what happens. It doesn't happen to us, happens for us. But in that situation, how can you say that happens for you? That is just. It's not just unlucky. It's just damn right. I can't even think of the words, to be honest. I'm struggling with the words. What you've been through it's just so severe.
Yeah, and there's the thought that so many children are still going through it now.
What advice would you give to those children?
Speak with someone you trust. Don't hold it in, because eventually that child will grow up, and the longer you put up with it, the harder it's going to be to talk about. It does feel a bit like that, because then you almost feel like, well, you blame yourself. Yeah. You think, well, it's my fault. I knew this isn't right. Yeah. And I let it happen. Yeah. And that constant talking to yourself like that is just.
So I was going to ask, what was the turning point? But I already know the answer. There's not one turning point where you started to give yourself that self-respect, that self-love, and that self. But you obviously doing the work. Have you got any kind of examples where the tide was turning almost from being that kind of self-loathing, I deserved it kind of mentality, to actually, no, I'm not going to play that game anymore?
I guess the first time I felt like I can deal with this without seeing someone professional, getting counselling, is when I got more into art, painting. And I find that such a therapeutic way of dealing with so many emotional things, but particularly, the bad memories, the trauma from there. So I feel like I've literally painted a lot of that, the anger, because I initially disgust and just really felt really bad and sorry for that little girl. But then anger really overpowered me for quite a few months after that, and I wouldn't let my daughter. I still to this day. So clearly, I haven't 100% dealt with it, but I wouldn't let my daughter stay at any female family member's house for sleepovers.
Sure.
Because I just fear that what if. So many of my family didn't understand why I wouldn't, because I just wouldn't tell them.
It's understandable though, isn't it?
But yes, painting, making art, I find that as an amazing outlet to kind of let all those emotions flow and get angry at the canvas and then just get rid of it,
Because I noticed I think there was the post was a painting about that situation. Do you want to talk about that? The paint, because you gave that to charity, didn't you?
Yes. Well? So this went on quite a while, me trying to deal with the initial kind of memories coming back, because my daughter was about 2 when I painted this. Yeah. Large scale, and the intention wasn't to paint about any of my memories. I always start with random marks and just see what develops on the canvas. Yeah. But then I saw a child's face, a sad face, and that triggered it. That just felt like I saw me in that painting, or a child who has had those memories, and it was all dark. I started off the painting, like most of my paintings start off with a dark underpainting because it makes any colors pop, but I just then intentionally left this dark and developed. And a crying, sad child, but she's under water, under the sea. Nobody can see or hear her cries.
Right.
She feels like she's suffocating.
Yeah.
But she's alone there. So that's the painting.
Beautiful.
But then I didn't want to profit out of it.
No.
Like I sell most of my paintings, but this one, and I didn't want to keep, for obvious reasons. I felt I painted my rage out somewhat.
Yeah.
And it was an emotion. It was a cathartic
yeah,
experience.
Almost an acknowledgement, not an acceptance, kind of that it actually happened, maybe.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, I would say acceptance, because I can't change it. So accept that it's happened.
See, that's a massive change, I think. Once you accept it, it's
yeah, because I
undeniable.
no longer question, why or why me, or why that grandfather who otherwise was a loving grandfather. He wasn't a horrible person, so that it was quite difficult in my head to I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, like somebody, or to just those two opposing qualities about him, because he was a loving, doting grandfather who loved his grandchildren. He would take us out on trips and yeah.
See, the way that you're looking at that is incredible. You can still see the positive attributes of that human being, even though what that person did to you. And it kind of is an interesting lens, and isn't it? It doesn't feel like you're necessarily blaming him.
No, what's the point? He's not around. I can't confront him. What he did was so wrong.
What would you say to him if you did?
Why? I would ask him why. I don't think he could answer it.
So you're saying here that you don't necessarily believe he did it with malice, or are you?
I don't know what to.
Yeah.
He was a simple man. He worked for the the National Railway. I don't know how to analyze this other than he did what he did, and I can't change it.
No.
So.
Okay. Well.
I would just ask him why. It would be a very uncomfortable conversation. It's probably for the best that he's no longer around,
Right.
Because I would have to confront all that again, all over again with him.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think it's a real, we'll move on to the other subject in a minute, but I guess it's a quandary for you in terms of you've managed to create your new life, harboring this in the background. Do you go back and process it, or do you just say, no, I'm done, I'm going to just crack on? So
sometimes I do, I think, oh, this has happened to me and how it's affecting me, and whether I should speak to someone about it. Because, like the science is there that all trauma, whether you are aware of it or not, whether you have memories of it or not, it still affects you on a cellular level,
of course,
and on a subconscious level. So maybe at some point I will feel like, okay, I should deal with this, but I don't feel it's affecting me.
I mean,
who knows for sure.
But you're such an interesting, funny, charismatic person, and I touched on it earlier. I think sometimes the trauma almost brings that out. I don't know.
I do sometimes feel like how much childhood trauma is needed for someone to turn out a well-rounded character, which sounds so wrong almost.
Well, not necessarily. Thank you for talking to us about that. I mean, I'm blown away. Let's move on through. So the journey then was kind of beyond that. Let's talk about perhaps, obviously, you were kidnapped, your mum. What's the next stages of that?
So yes, we started a new life in Hungary, and that was all happy memories. So my mum was very strict, extremely strict. She would always worry about what the neighbors would think, that we were, we weren't from that town.
Yeah.
So everybody will be judging us. Yes, she took the strictness to the extremes, really.
Like what?
I wasn't allowed to have sleepover at a friend's house.
How old are you at this point, roughly?
Oh, so I turned 12 a couple of months after we moved to Hungary. But even through teenage years, I wasn't allowed to have any relationships. I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend.
Seriously, right?
And she was just, it's all about school. I want you to study hard. We don't have anything. You can achieve something if you study hard, which is fair enough. But it got to the point where her dreams for me were different to my dreams for me.
Wow.
So I got into journalism from a young age. I got through there was a competition announced by the local TV and radio, and they were looking for youth program presenters for the regional TV and radio station. And I just went along because why not? And the assignment was to write an essay about the pen that I was holding, which happened to be a red pen. And I managed to fill 2 A4 pages, so that went well. And I got the job. I was then a co-host on that program. So part of it was on TV, part of it was editorial on the radio, as well as presenting. Yeah. And I got into more serious stuff than presenting news and sourcing news, interviewing.
It's a natural flair for like writing, journalism, creative.
Although I would have preferred to be behind the scenes, I was always a nervous person to be on camera or radio. Radio wasn't too bad, even though it was live. Nobody can see me. That's fine. TV, I wasn't into that really, but I got the job, so why not?
So were you quite shy?
Yeah. That still is a tendency, I would say. Even though you'll see a different persona on LinkedIn, it's because it's from the safety of my laptop and keyboard. Yeah. So that's different. Creativity then really flows, but if I'm in the spotlight, I find that a bit more difficult.
Yeah, I'm the same, because I've got a good following on LinkedIn. I kind of sometimes when I post, I sort of like I don't want to look back. It's a bit of a paradox that in terms of the area that we're in, we need to attract attention, but we don't actually want it.
Yeah, right, definitely. And you think, oh, am I attracting the right attention for the right reasons? You analyze everything, and like you said, you read back old posts and you think, oh, I can't believe I did that. With that selfie, what was I thinking? I was interested in your post actually. I think it was yesterday or the day before, where we talked about, I think you said something along the lines of 7% of communication is written, right? Body, and just talk to us about that, because I thought it was a really interesting lens you had there. Yeah, so I mean, this is obviously not me making the numbers up. This is, I read it from a behavioral psychologist, or I think it may have been an audiobook I've recently been listening to. And so 77% of our communication is verbal, whether that's written or spoken. That's 7%. Of course, written is different because then all of that and tone is so much more difficult to express in writing. But face-to-face communication, the majority of our communication is physiological, so body language, and the next biggest category is tone, how you deliver that line, and only 7% what you say.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I teach that a lot to my clients about, it's often not what we say, it's how we say it. So I could say the same thing to someone else and they could say the same thing but get a completely different reaction. So absolutely, there's a lot of psychology behind that, right?
Yes, and I think we're only scratching the surface really. Even science, behavioral science, neuroscience is fascinating stuff, and so relevant to marketing and to anyone who posts anything online. The minute you start posting, you're marketing yourself.
I think where I started to do well on LinkedIn was before I even did it, I didn't really believe in LinkedIn. I was quite a corporate Colin kind of type, really. But I told my story on LinkedIn in a pretty, I think, a vulnerable, authentic way. And I can't speak for other people, but I really believe that was the absolute catalyst to get my clients and pivot myself to 70,000 connections and everything else. And I feel that I don't think that you can fake authenticity or vulnerability. You either are or you're not. But that there's a real power in that. And I think there are some great people on LinkedIn that do that very well. But also, I think what do you think to all that kind of space?
I mean, yes, you mentioned that point about faking authenticity. And the thing is, if you have to pay for a course to learn how to be authentic, that by default, that's not authentic, right?
That's true, yeah.
So what is authenticity is, like you said, just being vulnerable. And that's so powerful because the minute you show your realness, warts and all, flaws, that's when people connect with you. The shiny marketing package. Look at me, I'm perfect. And my life is perfect. You know how Instagram used to be a few years ago, where everybody is just over filtered life. They only present the best parts. We don't buy into that anymore. We see through that. And I think even if people don't consciously think about that, they pick up on the fact that you're not sharing your whole real self. And some people will say, well, I don't want to and I don't have to. You know, I can do my job just as well. My business is great. But how much greater, how much better could that be if you really opened up? So because people relate to you on a human level.
Is that the distinguishing factor with your business? Just describe what it is and what makes it different, would you say?
I guess, you know, with content marketing, copywriting services, you could just make it all about the copy. You know, I could just be talking about how to write the perfect LinkedIn post.
Right. There's a lot of that going on.
There is, right? And I think we're just tired.
Yeah.
You know, it's if you eat caviar every day, you would get sick of it, wouldn't you? So no matter how high quality that advice is, fine, throw it in there now and again for the newcomers. But I think don't leave your personality off of LinkedIn. Bring it. I liken it to working, you know, say if you're working in an office scenario and you're chatting at the water cooler, it's not just business you talk about.
No.
You ask how your family's doing, how was your weekend, what you're up to. Where's that bruise from? Like you talk about personal stuff. You might even overshare. And the minute you overshare, that other person feels inclined to overshare and you bond. So deep, authentic stories, when you tell that to someone, you start a bonding process because you both release oxytocin and you can replicate that online. You can bond with your ideal audience, your ideal clients.
And just following the ideal LinkedIn template is not going to carry that much further than the first few posts. I think beyond that, you've got to build a story, you've got to build a personality, but you've got to, I think it's an emotional thing to it as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. You have to be prepared. The thing is, the more vulnerable you are, the more likely you are to invite the naysayers who aren't going to like your personal story, who are going to be against, well, why do you have to share that? Nobody's interested.
Totally.
And you have to grow thick skin. And I know that's easier said than done because it's not possible. You are gonna read 100 positive comments, and that one negative comment will really affect you.
It happened to me on Saturday. I did a post on Saturday about I hadn't seen my son in 6 years, and I bumped into him, and it was a really, I thought quite an emotional post, and I had 98 likes, which is not a high number, but there was this one comment on there that said, why do you have to post about this? Why can't you just build up a line of communication with your son? Basically telling me how to talk to my son. And it was like a totally out of context comment, really hurtful comment. But as you've just said there, there's always going to be some people. You could be Mother Teresa or whatever.
But see how you picked up on that one negative comment and not the 50, 60 something other positive, supportive comments. And it's human nature. We pick up on the negative because... well, pain is more, we are hardwired to kind of notice those things more.
What do you think that is, though?
I think it's self-preservation. You need to be aware of things that could hurt you. So on an emotional level, that's comes from.
So do you take compliments well then? Yourself? Pardon? Do you take compliments well?
No.
Is that because of what happened? Or
I never analysed it, but I know I find it uncomfortable.
Yeah.
No, I can't say a reason. It's just, okay, I don't know what to say now because I'm an awkward person.
Yeah. Talking about the shyness or the anxiety, because you come across, obviously online, the vampire stuff. It's funny. It's confident, all this kind of stuff. But there's always two sides to it, isn't there?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
I mean, I can be fun occasionally.
Are you sure?
But it takes a while.
I'm joking.
It takes a while for me to open up, and I guess that's easier to present that side of me online because I don't have to show all the other sides as much.
Yeah.
So I preach the vulnerability and authenticity to my clients because I know that it makes a huge difference in having that connection and bridging the trust gap. People trust you more if you're not perfect. Funnily.
Absolutely.
There are loads of studies done around that as well. When I was listening to something and it was like a group study, small group, and a room full of people, and you had to judge people based on their looks,
right? Yeah.
And then those same actors then, they were given instructions on like dropping something or messing up. And their likability factor went up according to everyone who was questioned. The minute you show flaws, people relate to you much sooner.
Yeah. No,
so
absolutely.
Do that online with your posts, and you know it already.
Yeah, but sometimes people jump on those flaws and only see the flaws as well. But I think, as you say, the thick-skinned element is so important. It's a bit like I now post with intention. So I guess there are some posts that I still post out because I want to get the likes. I'll be completely honest with you, but 8 or 9 times out of 10. It's about what value I can give to my audience. And I think when you do that, all the other stuff doesn't matter. You're not doing it for the validation.
Absolutely.
You're doing it.
And even if there are some posts where you think, okay, this is for the likes. If you're entertaining, you are giving value. Of
course, right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No.
We are all online for attention. There's no one can tell me to say, I'm posting, but I don't want the attention.
Yeah.
Why are you posting?
Exactly. So you've already articulated beautifully some of the harrowing situations you've been in. Have you had any other sort of dark moments or difficult moments in your life? I'm sure you have.
I talk about chess tournaments.
Right. Okay.
Oh no, that wasn't dark, but I suppose it's a bit of fun. So I used to be a gymnast because in Romania, if you show any sort of kind of talent towards being, a bit sporty and flexible, then in the communist times, you had no choice. You had to be a gymnast. And then I carried that on a bit in Hungary. I used to compete at national level.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, but my knee started going a bit too because I was training hard. Nothing major. I don't struggle with them. But at the time, our family doctor said, if you don't want to end up with arthritis by a young age, I recommend you stop doing the intense training. So then I swapped gymnastics for chess.
Oh, wow.
So I learned to play chess at 12.
Must be good then.
And I started to get better and better. To the point where my school then would send me on competitions. Locally initially, and then I would get better and better, and then national.
So we both live in Bristol. You've lived in London, I think. Is that right? Places like that.
I did initially 3 months in London, although that's another one of those stories you want to hear about, don't you?
Yeah.
So I was an au pair when I first came to the UK, and Hungary wasn't part of the EU at the time. This was 2 years prior to Hungary joining the EU.
Yeah.
And I just came across this. I was looking for au pair work because my English wasn't very good. Wasn't as good as it is now. So I took a gap year from uni. I was at uni in Hungary. I was studying journalism and English teaching. You have to have good English for English teaching, and our teachers were native English speakers. So our teacher was actually from the UK, didn't speak a word of Hungarian.
Okay.
So there's only so many ways he could help me. And I thought, well, the best way is I have a year in the UK and learn alongside children, because they are really good at teaching you English from the basics. And I ended up with a family who I just randomly found on a website. And had I gone through an agency, I would have never come across them because they were, as it turns out, they were banned by all the major au pair agencies at the time.
Oh, right, okay.
For mistreating au pairs.
Oh, wow.
So I ended up with that family.
Bloody hell, it's a bit unlucky.
Yeah. I only had enough money for a one-way ticket to come here at the time.
So what happened? I can guess what's happening. Gonna come next, sorry, I should say.
So the first few weeks went fine, but then the mother went back to work and they just locked me in the house for 12 hours a day. I had no way to get out, just hang out in the garden with their little boy.
Wow. Like a slave almost.
Yeah, I had to. So normally an au pair, you're only supposed to be the mother's help for 6 hours a day. And it's only for small, looking after a child and small jobs. But I was ended up cleaning their whole house. I was doing their cooking, everything.
I've heard this is still rife, actually, this kind of stuff.
Just, yeah. And I was just thinking, okay, I'll see how it goes. And then they paid me for the first month because that au pair work is cash in hand. It's legal cash in hand work.
Yeah.
At the time it was, I don't know if that's how that's changed now.
Yeah.
And they kept saying, oh, we'll pay you next month for your next lot. And it was only something like £90 a month. It's nothing.
Wow. It's so low, isn't
just it? Just cash, just pocket money, really.
Yeah, yeah. So to them, it's absolutely nothing. To you, it's, yeah.
And on paper, they looked like a solid family. So the guy was a manager at IBM.
Okay.
His wife was a visa issuing officer at Gatwick Airport.
So you just thought, it'd be fine.
But then they started saying things like, oh, my brother, as in the husband's brother, would make a really good husband material. We're going to bring him over. You can meet him. And it started to go really weird.
Yeah, not surprised.
Taking me to their... So I'm not religious. I come from a Catholic family. I'm not religious. But then they made me go with them to their Sunday worships and trying to get me really involved in there.
Yeah, trying to basically brainwash you into their ways of working.
Yeah.
Awful.
Now, nothing worse than that happened, really. I by that point, I had a friend who was living in Bristol. And we were chatting online when I could get online because I wasn't allowed to just use the internet at their house. So when I was on my one day off on Sunday, if I could get into an internet cafe at the time, I'd get on there and message her. And she said, oh, I know of a family who are looking for an au pair in Bristol. And I said, okay, yes, please. Can you have a chat with them? And then she got back to me saying, yeah, we can come and get you next weekend. So I've told this family I was working for, and the woman said, no, you're not allowed to leave. You will be an illegal immigrant if you do. You can only work for me. I wrote the invitation letter. You're not allowed to leave.
No way.
And basically, all the locks were, the house was always locked. I had no way of getting out. And at one point, I remember the neighbours in the garden when I was hanging out laundry, and she was whispering, are you okay?
No way.
And I didn't want to, because they could have heard me.
Yeah. So you were trapped.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't beaten or anything awful happened, but it was just quite insidious the way it was all building up. And then when I said, okay, this family's coming for me tomorrow, she said, oh, you can't leave, you're not allowed to leave. So when they were on their way the following morning, and by then I had a top-up SIM card payphone. Yeah. So I know my friend was calling me when they were on their way on the motorway, and I said, oh, they said I can't leave. And she said, okay, we're going to call the police. So the police got there around the same time, and my friend and the family, who was going to be my new family, that I was going to be an au pair for, they arrived. The police were there, listened to both our stories, and then this woman started going mad, saying she's been stealing from me. Check her bags.
Oh my God! Right.
Obviously, nothing was found.
Yeah.
And then she said to the police officer that I'm legally not allowed to work for anyone else because she wrote the invitation letter.
Oh God.
And who is the police officer? They didn't have access to internet at the time on their radio.
So they sided with her and believed her.
So they were trying to get a hold of the Hungarian ambassador who was on holiday at the time. So they couldn't check all this out. I was pretty sure that's not the case. I looked into that before coming to the UK. But they're going to believe a 19-year-old Hungarian au pair or a visa issuing officer at Gatwick Airport.
No way.
So they said that I would have to stay for 2 more days.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't feel safe. I don't want to stay here after this outburst and what's been happening.
Of course.
So then they said the only other ways would have to arrest you and find out, what your legal status is.
Yeah.
It might be fine, but you can't leave this house unless we arrest you and take you. So they I said, fine, read my rights.
Right.
No handcuffs or anything like that.
Get out. Wow.
I wasn't putting up a fight.
Yeah, of course.
But then an hour later at the police station, everything was, they found out that this family was blacklisted by all the au pair agencies. Normally an au pair has a 2-year visa. Their little boy was 2 years old. I was their 8th au pair.
So they've done this consistently with others.
Yeah, and others left after a week or so. I lasted 3 months.
So when you go through all these things, right? I'm sure there's more stuff actually. You can't be forgiven for thinking, why do I keep attracting these kind of things, right?
It's being naive, I suppose, assuming the best of people unless they prove me wrong.
Right, okay.
Because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But, also the mistake I made there is I didn't apply. I just wanted it quickly, it all happened within literally 3 weeks. I decided that I'm moving to the UK.
Yeah.
I didn't go through an agency because I did apply with some agencies, but it was so bureaucratic that I just was looking alongside on other websites, and then I came across this family.
So what's the difference between the current Zsike and the previous one? Then you talked about naivety there, but we talked about age and wisdom. I mean, you seem to be a different person now to what you were then, obviously.
Definitely. I guess these situations, you learn from them, right? You learn so you don't make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
I could have easily ended up with another problematic family in Bristol, but luckily that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And then, but that is the difference, is you think, okay, well, what can I learn from this and do something differently next time? And that probably comes with age, like being in my 40s now.
Yeah.
I would like to think that I won't be making some of the same mistakes or attract the same situations.
Yeah.
And they are few or far in between these situations. I can't remember the last time I had anything like that.
I think you've got like 8 or 9 people in your business. Am I right in saying you've got a couple of kids as well? I mean, talk to us about the recent times then, because obviously, being an entrepreneur, running a business, been a mum, having kids, and you've done so much.
Yeah, so I guess a lot has happened the last. I want to say things seems to be speeding up since having a family. One day blurs into another, sleepless night.
Yeah,
you know how those early years are.
Yeah,
but so I spent 12 years at Airbus in a large corporate environment.
Oh, right, okay.
Which was really scary to begin with at the time because, working on a site at the time, I think they must have had about 6,000 employees in Bristol, in a big open plan office, walking through hundreds of people looking at you as you walk through it was quite intimidating. And then so I started there as an admin archivist and slowly worked my way up. The last position I left, I was the internal comms manager for the landing gear department. And then I had my daughter and it didn't make sense to go back.
Yeah.
Just because that role involved a lot of travel to Toulouse. And I just thought, well, why have a child and leave her behind if I'm traveling so much,
Yeah.
And the mother instinct, I thought I could do all that. And then as soon as you have your child, you think, actually, this is silly. Why would I leave my child behind? So So I retrained in digital marketing alongside having my daughter at the time.
Yeah.
And then started Vampire Digital nearly 5 years ago. In the meantime, we had another child because COVID came, and what else are you going to do? So many lockdown babies. But that shop is closed now because I'm getting old, and 2 is plenty.
Yes, I agree with that.
And and Vampire Digital really was just me until about a couple of years ago. So I was just happy freelancing.
Yeah.
And actually, at some point, it was going so badly that I was applying for jobs.
Right. Okay.
And luckily nothing came from them. And it felt a bit like, okay, this is a failure. I'm a failure at trying to build a business here. Because I've never done it. I had no one to show me.
Why did you want to do it though in the first place?
Because I wanted to do things my way. And I just had that drive in me to do something different and not go back into employment.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my years at Airbus. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I think maybe stubbornness, because I've left already. So why I feel like I don't want to go back with my tail between my legs, kind of stubbornness. So that's why. So even when I applied for roles, I didn't apply back at Airbus.
You should be very proud of yourself. Do you feel proud of yourself?
I do now. Yeah. Because now it's beginning to feel like I've built something, that I made something of myself. And there were a few people in my life, in my past, who said I will never amount to anything.
Or family again, or?
Family and an ex.
Right.
And, and now I'm like, in your face, but it's for me and my children, because I want to show my children that there is another way. That you can have a better life and you can build it for yourself, and ultimately, your life is a accumulation of your decisions. So I want to show them how they make the right decisions to get where they want to get to.
How has being a mum changed you?
It feels like your heart is taken out of your body and it's in somebody else's body, and you can't do nothing about them being hurt.
Yeah.
You can't stop them. That's my biggest fear, is that something might happen to them and I can't do anything about it. There's only so much I can do to protect them. But other than that, I guess I want to make them proud, and I want to give them a much better life than I had. I want to protect them from all the trauma. So they have, within reason, they have everything they could want and need.
Yes.
Without spoiling them.
No, of course. It's always a fine line, isn't it? Because you want to treat them, but you don't want them to expect it.
Yeah.
We're kind of coming towards the end, unbelievably. So I've got to rush a couple of questions in now.
Yeah.
What would you say to your younger self now, looking back at that? That young 4-year-old.
That it's going to get so much better. You won't recognize yourself. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And in closing, what advice would you give someone starting out on LinkedIn or a young entrepreneur these days, breaking into the business world? What would you let?
I think the first thing I would say, don't overthink it. You can learn to fly along the way. You can build that plane while you're flying. You can build a landing gear while you're flying.
Yeah.
Because that's what stops a lot of people. They have all these plans. They think, how I'm going to do this, how I'm going to do that. They might even start but not finish, and just be a doer, not a talker. And you will make mistakes. Even when you think you sussed it all out, you will make mistakes.
Yes.
And particularly LinkedIn, I think, really, when you start out on LinkedIn from scratch, the first year is about finding your voice. Because you're not used to writing every day. Most people aren't. Most people don't.
Yeah, of course.
Journal.
It doesn't happen overnight, does it? You've got to build it, right?
So you're just sussing out your tone, how you speak, how you write, and build audience. Build a relevant audience.
Yeah.
Before you launch anything, if you have a startup and you want to sell to an audience, alongside building your startup, build a relevant audience, because it's much easier to sell to an engaged audience who already knows, likes you and trusts you, the classic free of marketing.
Absolutely.
If you have that audience ready-made, you can even pivot your business. If you have that strong personal brand built and you get sick of one business, you think, I'm going to start another business. If you just build a business brand and not your personal brand, nobody knows about your business.
No, you're right. So you're saying you don't necessarily have to have a plan. Get yourself out there, do some selfies, do some videos, talk, just build something. And then from there you can, I think that's good advice. Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, and the nice quizzing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Nice answering.
The Purpose-Led Leadership podcast is sponsored by Orca Pay Group. We've chosen to partner with Orca Pay Group because they are an umbrella and payroll company that leads with trust and transparency. They cultivate enduring partnerships with sustainable growth. They aspire to live in a world where umbrella and payroll companies are trusted, where confidence is earned and transparency is essential. They operate as strategic partners for growth, they are pioneers of exceptional service, and they put their recruitment agency partners and their contractor experience at the heart of everything they do.